Hi everyone, this is the lecture to accompany Chapter 4 in your textbook. Please also read Chapter 4 as there are many ideas and examples that I don't have time to address in this lecture. Okay, let's talk about language. One of the main ways in which we create our reality is by describing it. Our ability to use language really is the miracle, so to speak, that sets us apart from the other species on this planet. We hardly give a thought to language, and yet it is so important in every aspect of our lives. Words are of paramount importance in the reasoning process. Choosing the right words to get your message across and being able to understand the messages of others will help you to be a better, critical thinker. We tend to be fairly lazy when it comes to language, at least in our daily lives. We speak and expect that others know what we mean, and most of the time they do, or at least they get the general idea. But how many times have you ended up in a disagreement with someone due to the fact that they interpreted what you said differently than the way you intended? It happens a lot, and it's certainly frustrating in our everyday interactions. When it comes to persuasion, reasoning, and critical thinking, it is very important to cultivate precision in our use of language. And by precision, I mean exactness, choosing the right words that convey exactly the point you're trying to get across to someone else. For instance, suppose someone tells you that their father is a painter. Without further information, you might spread the word that your friend's father is an artist, when actually he paints houses for a living. Not to say there's not an art to that, but those really aren't the same thing. You could be guilty of spreading misinformation without meaning to. But you could also be the one guilty of lack of precision. Just because you know what your words mean to you doesn't mean another person does. And whose fault is that? The example in the chapter where a professor writes vague in the margins of what you think is a good paper, you might be upset, but really whose fault is it? The professor's for not getting your meaning? No, it's your fault for not being clear and precise. So in what ways are we imprecise in our use of language? Vagueness is when the meaning of our words is fuzzy and inexact. If you say someone's rich, what exactly does that mean? Bill Gates is definitely rich. What about someone who makes over $100,000 a year? If you make $30,000, they might seem rich to you. How about middle-aged? Who falls into that category? Do you mean 50, 35, 60, 40? Is there a range? The problem with vagueness is that while there are some examples that might fit and that everyone could agree on, borderline cases may or may not, or it might depend on your interpretation of what that word means. Now, the book does mention that there are times when being vague is exactly what's needed. If you're not sure of something, or if you're trying not to disclose too much, that's fine. But if you are specifically trying to get someone to understand something, then being vague will not accomplish that goal. Overgenerality. Using words that are too general, too many things would fit the description. If someone asks me what my husband looks like and I say, well, he has 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and some hair, that's unhelpful. The answer is not specific enough to adequately respond to the question, even though it's true. Context, however, is important when it comes to being general. The examples shown in the book make sense. Human, while an overgenerality, if you're asked to describe your fiancé, is not an overgenerality when it's the answer to, is your chess opponent human or computer? Also, ambiguity. A word is ambiguous when it has more than one common definition and the word used in context doesn't provide enough information about its exact meaning. For example, the word painter, as I said before, could mean a house painter or an artist. If my friend says his father is a painter, I will know what kind of painter if my friend also adds that his father's work is being displayed at the local art museum next week. There are 2 different kinds of ambiguities, semantic and syntactical. Semantic has to do with the individual meanings of words, as in this example, Joe went to the bank. Without more information, I don't know what kind of bank. Is it a financial institution? Is it a slope that borders a river? Is it a blood bank? Syntactical has to do with the way the sentence is structured, as in this example. Dog for sale. eats anything, and is especially fond of children. Does this mean the dog likes to eat children? Probably not, but it's hard to tell from this sentence. It could go either way. At the beginning of this chapter, I said that misunderstandings based on meanings of words and phrases are common and can lead to disputes. These are called verbal disputes, and they occur when people appear to disagree on an issue, but are actually disagreeing on the meanings of the words. It's the interpretation that's the source of the disagreement. The Steve loves Mary example is a great one because the word love means lots of different things to lots of different people. So if Steve and Mary have never discussed what the word love means to each of them, then it's not surprising that they're arguing about whether or not they love each other. If the dispute doesn't arise from the meanings of words, but instead from an actual disagreement about the facts, then it's called a factual dispute. This example is silly. O.J. killed Anna Nicole. No, he didn't. But it shows that the argument is not about the words themselves. It's about whether or not something is actually a fact. So as you can see, being imprecise can be a big problem when you're trying to be understood. It can also be a very big problem when you're trying to understand the meaning of another person. The book uses an example of someone claiming that, on average, men are more powerful than women. That's difficult to assess because, number one, what do they mean by average? Are there some statistics to show this, or do they just mean generally? That's vague, and what do they mean by powerful? Physically powerful, mentally powerful, powerful in society, in the workplace, culturally, all of the above? Do you see where I'm going with this? It can be difficult to determine what the actual meaning is. Because so many disputes can arise over the meanings of words, and because a convincing argument often rests on clear and precise definitions, it is important that you be able to express yourself as clearly as possible to your audience. Now, those audience members may or may not have a similar background to you, and even if they do, they may not interpret certain words and phrases in the same way that you mean them, so you may need to define terms for them. I'm going to talk about some different types of definitions and the reasons you might need to use them, and then I'll give you some strategies for working those definitions into your arguments. Stipulative definitions are the most subjective of definitions. What you are doing is defining a word or term to mean something new. Sometimes you might make up a new word to fit what you're describing, as in lottoholic for someone addicted to playing the lottery, or you might use an existing word to mean something else. A lot of slang is created this way, like whoever came up with the word sick to mean really good. If you do that, however, you are responsible for defining the term to your audience so they know what you mean. Otherwise, they might be completely lost. Persuasive definitions are usually emotion-laden, persuasive appeals that are more like claims than definitions. The definition of capital punishment, for example, right here, is really making the claim that capital punishment is murder. They can certainly be effective, but unless you have some really good solid evidence to support the claim, they tend to be somewhat unethical. Lexical definitions, also known as dictionary definitions, are the commonly understood and agreed upon meanings of words. They are good when you are using words that have more than one meaning, ambiguous words, to make sure everyone understands to which meaning you are referring. Precising definitions, this is one where you take a vague word and clarify it by making it more precise. The term class participation, what does that mean in my syllabus? And what the term heavy smoker means in a research study. Well, there are certainly uses for the first two kinds of definitions on this page, and you'll see lots of examples of them in the everyday examples we look at in this class. When it comes to your writing in this class, the last two kinds of definitions, the lexical and the precising definitions, will be the most important. So how do you use definitions in your arguments? Well, it depends. An ostensive definition is where you point at or draw or demonstrate the thing you're defining. So pointing at a door and saying, this is what I mean by door, or demonstrating a particular yoga pose and saying, this is downward facing dog pose, that is an ostensive definition. An enumerative definition is where you list examples of what you're talking about. Here's an example of an enumerative definition. The Bible Belt is a region that encompasses most of the southeastern U.S. and includes states like Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Kentucky. So those states are examples of states that fall into this definition. Then we have something similar. This is definition by subclass. These are also lists of things, in this case of categories that fit the description. In this example, when you're defining the word mammal, you would list things that fit that definition. Etymological definitions explain a word by talking about its origins and usage. When you look up words in the dictionary, you often find an etymological definition along with the traditional definition. So here's an example. Automobile combines the term auto, which is Greek for self, with mobile, which is French for move. Synonymous definitions help your audience understand a word or term by giving a synonym. Here's an example. Loquacious means talkative. Someone might not know what loquacious means, but they certainly would after you give the synonym for it. Finally, defining by genus and difference. This is where you define something by putting it into a general category and then differentiating it from other members in that category. The example here, calf is a young cow. That is a cow, that's the genus, that is young. That's the difference. Up to this point, we've talked about using language precisely in order to get our ideas across to our audience in a clear and understandable way. However, because humans are much more emotionally based than logically based, the vast majority of our language is emotive in nature. It can be very difficult to resist the pull of language that plays on our emotions. It's in our nature. And of course, we've all used language in ways that move our audience to our way of thinking. Again, that's natural. Because it's impossible for us not to be moved by the emotional contents of words, we really need to look at the ways in which we use and abuse language in this way. Words generally have two kinds of meanings. The denotative meaning, which is the dictionary or literal definition of a word, and the connotative meaning, which is the images and feelings associated with that word. The denotative meaning of a word may have emotional content, as in the word kitten. A kitten is a small young cat and as such is furry and probably cute. But more than that, depending on how you feel about kittens, the connotative meaning of kitten conjures up memories of baby kitties you've held, how soft they were, how much you cared about them, how happy they made you. Now, not everybody has the same connotative definition of kittens, but I think you see where I'm going with this. Words can be very persuasive because of their emotional content. Of course, we need to use language in this way to persuade our audience, since people are often persuaded more by emotion than reason, but we need to be able to discern the difference between someone using language fairly or unfairly. The test for emotive language is not whether the audience is emotionally moved, but whether the arguer is using the emotive power of words to manipulate the audience. There is an example in this book where a young man says to his girlfriend, "Don't mother me." He's using the word mother in a negative sense to imply that his girlfriend's actions are diminishing his power and maybe his masculinity. He's using language to make his girlfriend feel badly. That's manipulation. Now, if you'd said something like, "Look, when you do things like that, it makes me think you're trying to control my actions," that's much clearer. It's less manipulative, and it opens up the way for his girlfriend to respond and explain herself. There are some types of emotive language that might have some positive uses when getting our ideas across, but are extremely likely to be misused. These are euphemisms and politically correct language. So let's look at them. Euphemisms are milder or evasive words that are used in place of more blunt, direct, and possibly taboo language. For instance, how many different ways do we have to describe death? We might say someone moved on, passed away, and that might be the appropriate thing to say in individual circumstances. Dead sounds so final, but passed away sounds like they're still around somewhere, which some of us might actually think is the case. It just sounds more acceptable. In fact, lots of euphemisms are considered more acceptable than the word or term that they're actually taking the place of, like ladies' room for bathroom, or sleeping together for having sex. Yeah, they probably aren't doing too much sleeping. But euphemisms are often used to downplay or cover up things that should really be expressed as what they actually are. Take the term collateral damage. It's a military term that's often used to downplay the reality that innocent civilians are often injured or killed when armies fight. You need to be on the lookout for euphemisms to try and determine if they are simply being used in polite company or are being used to cover up or downplay something. Political correctness was originally used to describe language that was meant to avoid offense and give advantage to certain generally disadvantaged members of society. While the intent may have been laudable, many people feel that political correctness, or PC as it's known, has gone too far, and like euphemisms often hide the reality of a situation, calling someone economically disadvantaged rather than poor, or differently abled rather than disabled, or even crippled, which is a term that nobody uses anymore because it's considered insulting, may actually hide the reality that a poor or disabled person has to face in their everyday life. So we've looked at the ways in which we use and misuse language. Good critical thinkers are aware of these things and strive to be accurate and precise in their use of language. This is the end of the lecture to accompany Chapter 4.